Samuel Hart had lived on the wide Arizona plains for 8 long years, and during all that time, he had become used to the sound of silence. It was not the empty kind of silence that frightened people. It was the natural quiet that came from living far from towns, roads, and noisy crowds. It was the silence of wind moving through dry grass, of cattle stepping softly on sand, and of distant birds calling as the sun rose. Samuel had lived with this quiet for so long that it had become a part of him, almost like an old friend he trusted. Each morning, he woke before dawn. The sky would still be dark, only a thin silver line of light showing far in the east. Samuel would sit on the edge of his bed for a moment, listening to the early cold settling around the wooden house. The nights in the desert were colder than most people imagined, even in the warmer seasons. He would pull on his boots, grab his hat, and step outside before the sun had fully climbed. The first breath of morning always stung his lungs, but it also reminded him that another day had begun, another day he had to keep going. His ranch was simple. A small wooden house, a barn leaning a little to the left from old age, and a large open field where his cattle grazed during the day. There was a windmill that creaked whenever the breeze passed through, and a water trough where the cattle gathered during the hotter parts of the day. Samuel kept everything running with his own hands. If a fence broke, he fixed it. If the barn roof leaked, he climbed up with a hammer. If the windmill slowed, he cleaned and oiled it. There was no one else to help him, but he never complained. Work kept his mind steady. Samuel's routine never changed much. He would heat water on the small stove, make coffee, and eat a piece of bread or a few dried fruits. Then he would walk out to the field and check on the cattle, counting each one carefully. After so many years living alone, he had learned the value of noticing small things. If one animal walked slower than usual, he would spot it. If the water level was a little lower, he would see it. Some people might have grown bored with the same tasks every morning, but Samuel found comfort in the familiar. He hadn't always lived alone. Many years before, he had shared life with family, parents, siblings, and later the woman he once dreamed of marrying. But time changed people's paths. His parents passed away, his siblings moved to different states, and the woman he loved built a life far from the dusty plains he loved too much to leave. Her decision had not been cruel. She simply wanted a life with people, excitement, and movement, while Samuel wanted peace, space, and land he could take care of. They parted quietly, like two lines in the sand that drift apart when the wind blows. This was one of the reasons he chose to live alone. Life felt simpler without expectations. Others called it loneliness, but he thought of it as survival. Still, loneliness had a way of creeping up on him during certain moments, mostly at night. When the sun set behind the distant hills, and the world turned gold and purple, Samuel sometimes felt something heavy in his chest. He would sit by the wooden table, listening to the crackling of the small fire in the stove, and wonder how different life might have been if things had gone another way. These thoughts were not painful anymore. They were just memories he visited sometimes, like pages from an old book. One evening, after a long day repairing the barn door, Samuel sat outside on a stool with a small lantern beside him. The desert air was cooling, and the sky above was filled with endless stars. He had always admired the night sky. It reminded him how small human worries were compared to the vastness above. He leaned back slightly and listened to the wind brushing over the ground. Sometimes he could hear coyotes far away, but they never came near his ranch. The cattle were safe, and Samuel had grown used to this peaceful rhythm. The seasons passed slowly on the ranch. Summer arrived with burning heat that pressed down on the land like a heavy blanket. Samuel spent those days waking before sunrise and finishing most of his work before the sun reached its highest point. He would then sit under the shade of the barn, a cloth covering his neck, sipping water and watching dust rise in small swirls across the field. He knew how dangerous the heat could be, so he paced himself carefully. When autumn came, the wind turned sharper, and the land changed color. Samuel enjoyed this season the most. The air felt clean, the nights were cool, and the cattle were healthier. He would gather firewood, stack it neatly outside his house, and prepare for the colder nights ahead. Winter brought the hardest days. Not because of snow, Arizona's desert rarely saw deep snow, but because of strong winds and freezing temperatures at night. Samuel had to check the cattle more often. The cold made the animals restless, and he couldn't risk losing even one. Firewood burned quickly, and the nights felt longer than usual. Even though life was tough, Samuel found meaning in the work. The ranch had become a part of him. Every fence post, every wooden beam, every worn-out tool in the shed carried a memory of something he had built or repaired. He spoke very little to others, mostly because he rarely met anyone. Once every few months, he would ride into the nearest small town to buy supplies. People there respected him. They knew he lived alone and worked hard, though they didn't know much else about him. Samuel would greet them politely, buy what he needed, and return to his ranch before sunset. He did not dislike people. He simply preferred the land. Humans had complications, emotions, and conflicts. The earth, on the other hand, asked for effort and patience, and in return, it offered peace. One winter evening, as a cold wind swept across the plains, Samuel sat near his fireplace, warming his hands after checking the cattle. The sky outside had grown dark earlier than usual, and a strong chill moved through the air. He placed more wood into the fire and watched the flames rise. He felt the familiar weight of quiet falling across the house. The wind outside shook the windows slightly, but he was used to it. Winter winds could be loud, almost sounding like voices calling from far away, but Samuel never feared them. He finished his simple dinner, just beans and bread, and sat back, letting the warmth of the fire relax his tired muscles. He thought about the coming days, wondering whether another cold storm would blow in from the mountains. The desert weather could change quickly. As he sat quietly, he felt the weight of 8 years living this way. Not unhappy, not desperate, just aware of how long he had walked this lonely path. He wondered if anyone else would ever step into his life again. He didn't expect it, but sometimes the thought drifted through his mind. Little did he know, life was about to shift in a way he had never imagined. The silence he trusted for so many years was soon going to be interrupted by something unexpected. A knocking at his door, soft yet urgent, carried by the winter wind. But for now, he sat unaware, listening to the fire and the distant call of the night, believing the world would remain the same as it always had been. He had no idea that someone out there, moving through the cold darkness, was heading toward his ranch in desperate need of warmth and safety. Someone who would soon change the peaceful routine he had lived for nearly a decade. But the night gave no warning. It was just another quiet winter evening in Samuel Hart's long, lonely life. One that was about to take a turn he would remember forever. The night Samuel Hart heard the knocking was one of the coldest nights he had seen in many years. The wind had been blowing since late afternoon, carrying fine sand that brushed against the windows like tiny tapping fingers. By the time darkness settled, the air felt sharp enough to sting the skin, and the whole house seemed to shiver with every strong gust. Samuel had finished his work early, knowing the storm would grow worse. Now he sat near the fire, warming his hands and listening to the sounds outside. The fire crackled softly, casting gold and orange light across the wooden walls. Samuel leaned slightly forward, feeling the warmth on his face. The room behind him remained dark, and the only movement came from the flickering flames. He had just settled into a quiet moment of rest when a faint noise reached him. At first, he thought it was the wind hitting the door in a strange pattern. He ignored it, thinking the storm was playing tricks. But then the sound came again, this time clearer. It wasn't the wind. It was knocking. Samuel lifted his head and listened carefully. The knocks were soft but steady, as if someone didn't have the strength to knock harder. He stood up slowly, surprised and cautious. No one ever came to his ranch at night, especially during a strong winter storm. Visitors were rare, even in summer, and the nearest town was many miles away. He grabbed his lantern, lit it quickly, and walked to the door. The knocking continued, weak but persistent. When Samuel opened the door, the cold wind rushed inside, blowing sand across the floor. He held up the lantern to see who stood outside. At first, he only saw a shape wrapped in blankets, standing unsteadily in the dark. The light from the lantern fell on a face, an Apache woman. Exhausted, shivering, and clearly struggling to stay upright. Her hair was tangled from the wind, and her cheeks were red from the cold. Her eyes, dark and tired, looked at Samuel with a mixture of hope and fear, as if she wasn't sure how he would react. Samuel felt a shock of concern run through him. He had not expected anyone, much less a traveler, in such a condition. The woman seemed close to collapsing. Without thinking twice, he stepped aside and gently motioned for her to come in. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped through the doorway, stumbling slightly. Samuel closed the door quickly to keep the cold out. The warmth of the house hit her immediately, and she wrapped her blankets tighter around herself as if trying to trap the heat. Samuel placed the lantern on the table and spoke carefully, not wanting to scare her. "Sit near the fire," he said softly. "You're freezing." The woman nodded silently. She moved toward the fireplace, each step slow and weak. Samuel noticed her hands shaking as she held the blankets. He hurried to bring an extra quilt from the back room and placed it near her. She looked up briefly, offering a quiet, thankful expression before lowering herself onto a small wooden stool by the fire. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The fire warmed the room, and Samuel watched as the woman tried to steady her breathing. Her face slowly relaxed as the heat reached her skin. Samuel didn't want to ask questions too quickly. He could see she was deeply tired. After a moment, he poured warm water into a cup and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, holding it carefully, as if it were the most precious thing she had touched in days. She sipped the warm water slowly, letting the heat travel through her body. Samuel could see how cold she must have been. Her fingers were stiff, and her movements showed how exhausted she truly was. When she finally gathered enough strength to speak, her voice was soft and a little shaky. She introduced herself as Nayeli. The word rolled gently off her tongue, and Samuel repeated it in his mind to remember it. She explained with short breaths that she had been traveling with a small group of her people. They had been moving across the plains to visit relatives farther north, but when the storm came earlier than expected, she had been separated from them. By the time she realized she had lost her way, the winds were too strong, and she could not find the tracks again. Samuel listened quietly. He didn't interrupt. He could tell the journey had been rough. Nayeli continued, saying she had walked for hours in the cold, hoping to find shelter or a firelight somewhere in the distance. When she finally saw the dim glow from Samuel's house, she followed it with the last strength she had. Samuel felt a deep sense of responsibility settle in his chest. She had come to his ranch in desperate need, and there was no way he could let her walk back into the cold. "You're safe here," he said gently. "You can rest as long as you need." Nayeli looked at him with tired eyes, and for the first time since entering the house, a bit of relief showed on her face. She nodded slightly, but didn't speak again for a while. Instead, she focused on the fire, letting its warmth reach her bones. Samuel brought her a plate of simple food, warm beans, a slice of bread, and some dried fruit. She accepted it gratefully, eating slowly, as if every bite reminded her how hungry she truly was. Samuel sat across the room, giving her space, but keeping an eye on her in case she needed anything. After she finished eating, the room grew quieter. The wind still howled outside, but inside, the fire offered comfort. Samuel asked her softly if she needed anything else. She shook her head, pulling the quilt closer around her shoulders. He could tell she was fighting sleep, her eyes blinking slowly. "You can rest here," Samuel said. "It's warm, and the storm won't be passing anytime soon." Nayeli looked around the small house, her eyes landing on the bed in the corner. She seemed unsure about using it. Samuel understood her hesitation. She didn't want to impose or appear disrespectful, so he spoke again, carefully choosing words that would put her at ease. "The bed is yours tonight," he said. "I'll rest near the fire. You need the warmth more than I do." At first, she hesitated again, but the exhaustion in her body was too strong. She needed real rest, not just sitting near the fire. Finally, she nodded, grateful for his kindness. Samuel helped her settle onto the bed, placing extra blankets around her. She lay down slowly, her breath coming out in long, tired sighs. Within minutes, her eyes closed, and she drifted into sleep deep, peaceful sleep she had desperately needed. Samuel returned to his chair by the fire, watching the flames dance. The room felt different now. For years, he had been alone every night, but now there was someone resting in his home, someone who had arrived like a sudden whisper carried by the wind. Samuel felt a strange mix of worry and calmness. He didn't know who she was beyond her name, and he didn't know what would happen when the storm ended. But he knew he had done the right thing. As the night went on, the storm outside grew stronger. Sand hit the windows, and the wind howled through the cracks. But inside the small house, warmth filled the air. Samuel stayed awake for a long time, making sure the fire would not go out. He didn't want the room to grow cold while Nayeli slept. Every now and then, he glanced toward the bed, checking that she was comfortable and breathing evenly. Hours passed. The storm showed no sign of ending. Samuel eventually rested his head against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't tired enough to fall fully asleep, but he allowed himself to relax just a little. He knew tomorrow would bring questions about where Nayeli's group had gone, how far she had walked, and what she wished to do next. But those worries could wait. Tonight was about keeping her safe. As the fire glowed softly and the winter wind continued its restless song outside, Samuel realized that this unexpected arrival from a world far different from his own had already changed something inside him. For 8 years, his life had followed the same quiet rhythm, but now, inside his home, a stranger slept peacefully, bringing with her a new presence he had never expected. The night stretched on, and Samuel remained by the fire, listening to the stillness in the room. He didn't know why fate had brought Nayeli to his door, but he sensed that the coming days would reveal the reason. For now, the only thing that mattered was the warmth of the room, the steady breathing of the woman resting in his bed, and the understanding that his long, isolated life had taken its first small step toward change. The morning after the storm, Samuel woke to the gentle sound of the fire still crackling. He had kept it burning through most of the night, adding wood every time the flames began to shrink. His back was slightly stiff from sleeping in the wooden chair, but he didn't mind. His first thought was of Nayeli. He turned his head slowly toward the bed, expecting to see her still resting, but to his surprise, she was awake, sitting up with the blankets gathered around her shoulders. Her eyes were open, calm but thoughtful, as she looked around the quiet room. Samuel nodded politely in greeting. She returned a small nod, her eyes soft and grateful. She seemed much better than the night before. Her face had color again, and her hands were no longer shaking. The warmth, food, and rest had clearly helped her regain strength. "Did you sleep well?" Samuel asked gently. Nayeli hesitated for a moment, then answered in a low voice, "Yes, thank you." Her words were simple, but the emotion behind them was clear. She hadn't expected safety or comfort after walking through the cold storm. Samuel added more wood to the fire and prepared a simple breakfast: warm water, a slice of bread, and some dried fruit. Nayeli accepted the food quietly, eating slowly as she gathered her thoughts. Samuel didn't push her to talk. He understood that she needed time. He also sensed that she had lived through something difficult before reaching his door. After breakfast, Samuel stepped outside to check on the cattle. The storm had left behind cold air and scattered patches of frost across the ground. The sky was a bright blue now, clear and open, as if the storm had washed every cloud away. Samuel walked the perimeter of his ranch, making sure no fences had fallen during the night. As he worked, he thought about the unexpected guest inside his house. He wondered where her group might be now. The land was wide, and storms often pushed travelers off their paths. Samuel knew from experience that a person could walk in circles in the desert without realizing it. He hoped her people were safe. When he returned to the house, he found Nayeli standing near the window, looking outside quietly. The sunlight touched her face, giving her a soft, warm glow. She seemed deep in thought, as if the world outside stirred memories within her. "The storm is gone," Samuel said as he walked in. "Yes," she replied gently. Samuel noticed her eyes following the open land. She seemed to understand the desert in a way that was different from him. Her gaze was not just curious, it was knowing. Like someone who had grown up listening to the language of the earth. For a while, they stood in quiet understanding. Then Nayeli turned to him and said, "Your home. It is very quiet." Samuel nodded. "It has been quiet for many years." Nayeli didn't ask why. She sensed that some answers reveal themselves only with time. Instead, she offered a small smile and said, "Quiet can be good." Her voice carried the weight of someone who understood silence deeply. As the morning continued, Nayeli helped Samuel with small tasks. She folded blankets, swept sand from the floor, and cleaned the corner where snow and dust had blown inside the night before. Her movements were calm and respectful. Samuel tried to stop her, telling her she should rest, but she gently shook her head. "Moving helps me feel better," she said softly. Samuel didn't argue again. He sensed that regaining strength also meant regaining purpose for her. He understood that feeling. Work had kept him steady through the years. Perhaps it helped her too. Later that day, as the sun climbed higher, Nayeli began sharing more about her life. They sat on 2 stools near the fire, warming their hands while she spoke. She told Samuel about her family, the teachings of her grandmother, the stories she grew up hearing, and the songs her people sang around the fire during long journeys. She described how she had learned to read the land, how to follow tracks, how to find water hidden beneath dry soil, and how to understand the meaning behind the wind's direction. Samuel listened with quiet interest. He had spent many years working with the land, but Nayeli spoke of it with a different kind of connection. To her, the land was not just a place to survive in. It was a living thing, something that carried history and wisdom. Her voice was soft but steady, filled with a kind of strength that came from experience rather than force. After sharing her stories, she listened to Samuel's. He was slower to open up, not because he was hiding anything, but because he wasn't used to talking so much. Over the years, his conversations had grown quiet, reserved, and often limited to necessities. But as Nayeli's steady presence filled the room, he felt words rising naturally. He told her about his early years, how he and his family had built the ranch together, how he learned to care for cattle, how he had loved the land since he was young. He spoke about the people he once lived with, and how life had led him into solitude. He didn't share every detail. Some memories were still too close to his heart. But he spoke enough for Nayeli to understand the shape of his life. Nayeli listened with the kind of attention that made a person feel seen. She didn't judge his choices. She didn't question why he lived alone. She simply understood that every person's journey carries both quiet suffering and quiet strength. As days passed, Nayeli grew stronger. She walked around the ranch with Samuel, helping him with small tasks. She had a natural sense of direction, and her eyes caught details that Samuel often overlooked. Once, she pointed out a patch of dried grass that hid a natural water line underneath. Another time, she showed him a way to repair a wooden post using fewer nails by aligning the grain differently. Samuel realized she carried knowledge he had never learned, and he appreciated it quietly. Their evenings were the calmest part of the day. After finishing their work, they sat near the fire, sharing stories, memories, and small moments of laughter. Sometimes they said very little and simply enjoyed the warmth of the room. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It felt peaceful, like 2 people who understood that companionship didn't need constant words. Nayeli told Samuel about the night she got separated from her group. She explained how she tried to follow the stars, but lost her path when clouds covered the sky. She walked for hours, guided only by the hope of finding shelter. Samuel could hear the exhaustion in her voice as she described the cold wind cutting through her clothes, and the fear of not knowing where to go. He felt a quiet ache in his heart for the struggle she had faced alone. "You were brave," Samuel said gently. Nayeli shook her head. "I was just trying to survive." "Sometimes surviving is the bravest thing," Samuel replied. Nayeli held his gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. His words touched her deeply. She had walked a long path, both physically and emotionally, before arriving at his door. To hear someone acknowledge her strength warmed her more than the fire ever could. As more days passed, the bond between them grew naturally. They laughed, sometimes soft, honest laughter that came from shared moments. They taught each other simple skills. Nayeli showed Samuel how to track small animal footprints near the water trough. Samuel taught her how to mend a leather strap with even stitching. These small exchanges made the days feel full, warm, and meaningful. The ranch no longer felt like a place of emptiness. Samuel noticed it first when he walked through the house one morning. The air felt lighter, as if someone had opened a long closed window. The silence was still there. But it was a different kind of silence, one mixed with breathing, footsteps, and the soft rustle of blankets. A shared silence. Samuel realized that Nayeli's presence had changed something inside him. He woke with more energy, he worked with more purpose, and in the evenings, he no longer watched the fire alone. For the first time in years, he felt the gentle comfort of having someone nearby, a presence that didn't demand anything from him but gave something back in a quiet, natural way. Nayeli felt the change too. She felt safe in the small wooden house, warmed not just by fire but by kindness. She knew Samuel had offered her shelter, without expecting anything in return. That kind of generosity stayed with her. She slept peacefully at night, trusting the roof over her head and the man who had opened his door without hesitation. Sometimes, late in the evening, Nayeli would look at Samuel and think about how rare it was to find a place where trust came easily. And Samuel, in those same quiet moments, would glance toward her and wonder how someone could bring so much calm into his life simply by being present. Day by day, their connection deepened, not through dramatic words or actions, but through shared time, shared silence, and shared understanding. Two people from different worlds had found comfort in each other's presence, carried not by expectation but by simple human kindness. Neither of them knew what the future would bring, but they knew one thing for certain. The storms of the land had brought them together, and the quiet days that followed had turned two lonely paths into one peaceful moment in time. Their world had changed gently, naturally, and beautifully, just as the desert changes after a long storm, when new life quietly begins to grow. The next morning started quietly, but it carried a feeling of change. Tahir woke up with a calm mind, something he had not felt in a long time. The sunlight entered his room softly, and for the first time in many days, he did not feel rushed or stressed. He sat on the edge of his bed and took a long breath, thinking about everything he had been through. The challenges, the mistakes, the lessons, and the slow steps that led him to a better understanding of his own life. All of it felt like a long journey. But now, he finally sensed a turning point. He got ready and walked outside, noticing how different everything looked. The same streets, the same neighborhood, the same people, but his view had changed. He no longer felt lost or confused. He felt more focused, more aware, and more connected to the life around him. Even the sound of children playing nearby made him smile. For a long time, he had been so busy dealing with problems that he had forgotten how peaceful small moments could be. Later in the day, Tahir decided to visit the small shop he often went to. The shopkeeper, who had seen him many times before, noticed something different in him. "You look relaxed today," the shopkeeper said kindly. Tahir smiled. "Yes, I think I finally understand what matters the most," he replied. They exchanged a few friendly words, and Tahir continued his walk. As he walked, he remembered the promises he had made to himself. He had promised to become more patient, to communicate better, to handle situations calmly, and to never let anger or frustration control his decisions again. He had promised to protect his relationships, his peace, and his future. These promises were not easy, but they had changed the direction of his life. That afternoon, Tahir met his close friend who had supported him during his difficult days. His friend listened to him carefully, as Tahir shared how he had been feeling. "You've come a long way," his friend said. "I can see the difference in you. It's not just in your words, it's in the way you talk, the way you sit, the way you think. You're more mature now. Tahir appreciated these words. He had always hoped someone would notice the effort he was putting into becoming a better person. It felt good to know that his growth was visible. They talked for a long time about life, relationships, mistakes, and hopes for the future. His friend told him that every human makes mistakes, but real strength is shown when someone learns from them instead of repeating them. Tahir agreed. He knew that his journey wasn't perfect, but he was proud of the direction he was moving toward. When he returned home in the evening, he sat alone for a while and thought deeply about the future. He imagined the kind of life he wanted, peaceful, stable, full of understanding and kindness. He imagined himself helping others, sharing his experiences, and guiding anyone who felt lost the way he once felt. He also thought about the people who had stayed with him during his hardest time. Their support, their advice, and their trust had helped him more than they knew. He made a silent promise that he would always be there for them too. After all, life becomes more meaningful when people support each other through good and bad moments. Days passed, and Tahir's life slowly started to look different. He built new routines, healthy habits, and a stronger mindset. He began reading more, learning more, and meeting positive people who encouraged him to grow. Every day, he tried to be better than he was the day before. Every morning felt like a new chance to start fresh. Sometimes he faced small challenges, but this time, he didn't panic. He handled them with calmness and wisdom. Instead of reacting quickly, he thought carefully before speaking. Instead of blaming others, he tried to understand their point of view. Instead of remembering past problems, he focused on creating positive solutions. This new version of himself surprised even him. One evening, he sat with his notebook and wrote down everything he had learned during the difficult journey. He wrote about patience, trust, communication, and self-control. He wrote about the importance of understanding someone before judging them. He wrote about how small misunderstandings can turn into big issues if people don't talk openly. And most importantly, he wrote about how every problem has a solution if a person keeps a steady mind. Writing these things gave him clarity. It reminded him how far he had come and how much he had grown. He realized that even painful experiences can shape a person into someone stronger and smarter. As more time passed, Tahir found himself becoming the person he always wanted to be. He became more responsible, more positive, and more forgiving. He learned to forgive himself too, which was one of the hardest things. But once he managed that, he felt lighter, wiser, and more peaceful. One day, he looked at his reflection in the mirror and felt proud. Not because his life was perfect now, but because he had faced his challenges instead of running away from them. He had grown through every difficulty and found a new direction. This kind of strength came from inside, and he carried it with him every day. Whenever someone came to him for advice, he spoke carefully and gently. He didn't pretend to know everything, but he shared what he had learned through experience. People trusted him because he spoke honestly and without judgment. He had become a calm listener, something he once struggled with. Slowly, his relationships improved too. People noticed the change in him. They felt more comfortable talking to him. They felt safer sharing their thoughts with him. His new attitude made his connections stronger and healthier. In the final weeks of his transformation, Tahir realized something important. Sometimes life teaches lessons in ways we don't expect. Though the journey may hurt, the growth that comes afterward is powerful. Every mistake he had made became a step toward understanding. Every challenge he faced became a stepping stone toward maturity. One quiet night, he walked outside and looked at the sky. It was filled with stars, shining gently. The cool breeze touched his face, and in that moment, he felt grateful. He whispered a small prayer of thanks for everything: the hard days, the good days, the friends who stayed, and the strength he found within himself. He finally understood that life is not about being perfect. It's about becoming better. It's about learning, growing, and helping others grow. It's about choosing peace over anger and understanding over judgment. Tahir had changed, and this change was real. From that moment on, he carried a new purpose: to live with wisdom, kindness, and patience, to protect his peace and support the people he cared about, to speak gently, act responsibly, and think deeply before making decisions, and to never let negativity or confusion control his life again. His story became a reminder that even the hardest moments can lead to beautiful beginnings. All it takes is courage, effort, and a sincere heart.